everyone. My name is Jesse Chason with Lisa Blanchard as the host of Airing Addiction.
I share often my journey started on this campus. Got sober as a client here, just like you.
I really do see phenomenal change.
Always hope. I've seen situations that on the surface look impossible become possible.
Doing this podcast is to share those recovery stories, be honest about what the challenges are and have some real conversations, but kind of share that out on the airwaves. Welcome everybody to today's episode of Airing Addiction. It is a beautiful May day. We fit this in just before the end of May here in Massachusetts. So if you're listening now, we're close to it. Hopefully you're enjoying some beautiful weather as well. I'm Lisa Blanchard. I'm really excited to have this episode today, but I'm going to turn it over to Jesse, who will introduce our guest today.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Good morning. And yeah, we snuck in right with just a few days left. Our producer, James, wears many hats, and he was like, hey, are we doing one this month? And I totally thought it was because it was so close. But here we are, and yes, it is a beautiful day. The sun is shining, and I'm really excited. I think I say that for all the guests, but this particular guest I've had the pleasure of knowing for years, and he's been in my life now consistently for over a year, and he just has such a great story of experience, strength, and hope here to share it with us today and talk with us. Take it away, Jim.
Thank you. So my name is Jim. Jim S. I don't know if I'm supposed to say my last name, but I am an addict and an alcoholic, sex addict, love addict, person in long-term recovery, all the above. And, for a long time, I would just identify as an addict to try to, be respectful to the fellowship that I was most active in, but my recovery has evolved over the years. And so the terminology that I used to describe myself has as well. But, I don't know. I tried not to think too much about what I was going to say, because usually when I do that, I don't say what I want to say anyway, and then I just get lost. So, but I grew up in Grafton, Massachusetts, right next to Westboro, home of New England Recovery Center. And I grew up in a household where both of my parents were very educated. My dad was a lawyer. My mother was a preschool teacher, master's level inclusion preschool. So she worked a lot with kids with special needs, and had a pretty, I'd say not quite idyllic, but a pretty good childhood. From the outside looking in. I over the years of doing commitments and hearing commitments come into facilities and going to meetings, one common thing that I think a lot of people in recovery share is I always felt different than everyone else. I always felt less than. I never quite felt like I fit in, even though I had friends, I had, interests. I loved sports. I loved music. I loved, writing poetry. I loved like creative things. I had a lot of things that I was good at, and friends, but I still felt like I never was quite a part of. Like I was always missing out on some sort of like inside joke or something. So I do have some abuse in my childhood, which I won't get into too in depth, but I think it's important to share that because I think a lot of people in recovery, including myself, have that in common as well. So a lot of my recovery today is unlearning patterns that I learned because of experiencing some trauma at a young age. But fast forward a little bit, I always did well in school. Like I said, I was a pretty good athlete. I knew from probably around the time I was like 10 or 11 that I was gay. And I didn't really have the words for that or the language, but I just looking back, like that's probably when I really knew. But I also, out of an abundance of like self-preservation and just not feeling comfortable in my skin and feeling like I had anyone I could talk to, I knew that I had to like bury that. And around that time too, I had a huge growth spurt, and I was, big and burly and deep voiced and hairy from the time I was in like 7th grade. So the picture that I had in my head of what it looked like to be gay and what I looked like were two different things, which I know today is like some internalized homophobia and just some misconceptions about sexuality and masculinity and things like that. But all that to say, I felt like I did not fit. I felt like something was really wrong. I felt like, I didn't understand what was happening. So around that time, I started to cut. I started to self-harm. And, I did it secretively. I did it in places where no one could see. But it was like that first time that I tried to express outwardly the pain that I was experiencing inwardly. And that's something else that I've had to learn in recovery, is how to express, what's going on inside, outside in a healthy way. I was thinking a little bit yesterday about this too. I think the first time that I consciously used drugs, I was a freshman in high school, but or not consciously, but without a doctor. So I had a lot of teeth problems, and would get laughing gas from a young age. And I think that was the first time I remember feeling like, oh, this doesn't hurt as much if I put something in my body. If I get high, the procedures don't hurt as much. So when I smoked weed the first time in high school, I felt like I felt when I got the laughing gas. And all the people who said, oh, you're not going to feel it your first time you do it, you might not. I felt it and I liked it. And the thing that I liked most about it was that it got me out of myself. I didn't have to feel like I was trapped in my brain. I didn't feel like I was trapped in my body. I felt like I could just, have a little bit of relief from sounds dramatic, but like the prison of my mind. I had a little bit of relief from that. Looking back too, I was definitely clinically depressed at that time, and I didn't feel like I had anyone I could talk to. And, that was a factor as well. So I went from, I started smoking weed because I got cut from the basketball team. I went to a regional high school, and I was really, like I said, really, really into sports, really loved playing sports. And I got cut and I didn't know what to do with that. So I was like, fuck it. Oh, excuse me. F it.
We've never heard that word before.
Oh yeah. No, sorry. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, forget it. I'm going to smoke weed. So, a couple weeks later, I drank for the first time, and I drank to the point of being completely sick, completely passed out, completely blacked out, completely a mess. And I did it again the next weekend because I liked the way that it made me feel. It numbed me and it got me out of myself. So fast forward a little bit. Like I said, I grew up in a house where education was like a priority. So I knew that I had to do well enough in school to stay off everyone's radar. So I did that. But I look back and I wonder, if I'd really applied myself, if I had tried in school instead of, smoking weed out every day, drinking mostly every weekend in my later high school years, what would have been different. But I got into a university in New York City, and I quickly fell in with the people who were drinking like I drank, which evolved to the people that smoked weed like I smoked weed. And then my freshman year, I tried cocaine for the first time. I loved it. I think I tried like Adderall first, and I was like, wow, I can drink for a really long time and not get sick if I take this before I drink. So it just became, people were passing it around as like a study aid, but for me, I sought it out so that I could party more. And my first semester, I did okay, even though I was drinking every day and all that. And my second semester, I was home for Easter break and was introduced to crystal meth by a former high school teacher of mine, which is a long story for another day. But it was a pretty quick process of getting addicted to it. And, I mentioned earlier having the knowledge that I was gay when I was probably, just before being a teenager. So around this time, I started to come out to people, and that coincided with my crystal meth use. And a lot of people know, some people don't know, crystal meth has been kind of ravaging the gay community for years. And it's kind of not talked about as much as it should be, in my opinion, because there's obviously the opioid epidemic, which, people overdose and die, and it's sad and it's tragic. And I've lost a lot of loved ones and people, but I've also watched a lot of, gay men over the years that I've been close to, and that I haven't been close to, either go completely psychotic, get diagnosed with HIV, all kinds of things happen. But anyway, so when I was 19 and new to that scene, it was very normalized. Like, we're partying, I'm going to go over here and party. And it was like, oh, this is fun. This is great. I love this. It can let me forget about myself. I can have sex the way I want to. I can, get that external validation for how I'm feeling like I want to. And it was a pretty quick downward progression. I failed out of school. And that was my first real life consequence from my using. And I kind of just glossed over it. Like, it was it was a big thing, but it wasn't, and I just kind of kept using the way I wanted to. And I also, kind of developed these secret lives, and that had started in high school, but I would wear this mask with the weed smokers, and this mask with the nerds, and this mask with the people I played sports with. And then in college, it was like, I had my friends that I would hang out with, and my significant other. We'd smoke weed, and I'd sneak off for weekends at a time to go do meth. And no one really knew about the other groups. And, so I was constantly doing a juggling act. But around that time, my mother, around the time I was 14, I found out that she was an alcoholic. That was my first introduction to what that word meant, or what an alcoholic was. And it was really confusing for me because she was very secretive with her drinking. She was very, very functional. The term functional alcoholic, I think, gets thrown around a little bit. And I think it's a dangerous misnomer, because I think, how functional are you really if you're depending on a drink to wake up in the morning to get you to your job? But she was that. She was a functional alcoholic. And when I was 19, actually, in a couple of days, actually, she, long story short, she drank herself to death. And, I was the last person that she had any contact with for the last 6 months of her life. So I carried a lot of guilt around that for a long time. I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know about the treatment industry, and I didn't know about, detoxes and sections and the things that I know about now. But, I watched her turn yellow and become bloated. And when I was, I was 20, excuse me, not 19, but I was 20. My older sister was 26. We had to make the decision to take her off life support. And I took comfort in the fact that, I knew she had a do not resuscitate order, and I knew that, we were making this right decision by her. However, obviously, it was a very traumatic, upsetting event in my life. And I used that as an excuse for a long time to continue my using. And around that time also, my dad had been brought up on some charges, and he spent 2.5 years in Worcester House, 3 months after she passed. So it was this perfect storm of, I didn't have I didn't really have anywhere I felt like I could go. I had these things in my life that were like, look at me, if this happened to you, you would use the way that I was using, and, no one could tell me anything. So the next 6 years of my life, again, for the sake of time, I'll fast forward a little bit, but was just keeping my head above water. It was like, I'll live here and I'll work this, menial job, and I'll, do what I need to do to get by. And you can mark the progression of my drug use and alcoholism by the men that I dated. I dated, my first significant other was a weed dealer, and then it was a guy who owned a club and, had a little cocaine, and then it was a guy who smoked crack and sold it. And then I graduated to, meth, and that was kind of my hustle too. And I look back at that person and I feel sad for him, because I think I settled for less and settled for people I shouldn't have settled for, because I was sick. So I looked for really sick people who could keep me in drugs. And I didn't really identify it as that at the time. I wasn't consciously seeking those people out, but my disease was doing that. So when I was 26, I was kind of on death's door. I was in an apartment, psychotic, waiting for my partner at the time to come back from copping. And That year had been in like 5 or 6 different psych wards. I would stay up for like days at a time, usually from like 10 to 13 days, crash for 2 or 3 days, stay up for 10, 13 days. So I'd end up in a lot of psych wards. But this particular time, I had a moment of clarity. I had a minute where I was like, I don't want to die on this dude's couch. I need help and I don't want this for myself. So I went into a psych ward and told them, I need further treatment, or I didn't have that language at the time, but I was like, if you let me out, I'm going to die. I don't know what to do. So I went to my first, I think it was CSS in Springfield, and I was there for 2 weeks, and I heard a lot like, go to further treatment or you're not going to stay clean and blah, blah, blah. And my insurance ran out. So I wasn't able to go to further treatment. And I wound up at my dad's house. And I remember thinking like, the only time I'd ever been sober for longer than a week was when I did the 2-week DUI program for my second DUI. So I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this. But I heard at that program, like, go to meeting your first day out of treatment, raise your hand, say you're new, get active, get a sponsor, get a home group, get active in the home group. Like I listened. I was beaten down and broken enough to finally listen when people were trying to help me. So I did that and felt kind of comfortable at that NA meeting that I went to, and went to 2 meetings the next day and 2 meetings the next day. And, probably around like 6 months of sobriety, I remember thinking like, wow, I can do this. I'm doing it and I can do this without being in a facility. So I did all those things I just mentioned, and I continued to go to meetings. I got a sponsor. I did a lot of meetings that first year. I did like over probably 775 meetings that first year, and without a car, without a license. People picked me up. People showed up for me. People took me under their wing, and I'm eternally grateful for that because it saved my life. And the second year, I kept doing those things, and I went back to school, and I got my driver's license. I got a car, and I got in the first like loving relationship in my life, and things were good. And I got my associate's degree between years 2 and 3 to teach early childhood education is what my degree was in, and things were good. Fast forward, I'm sponsoring people. I have a sponsor. I'm doing all that. And then slowly but surely, I started to feel like I had to make up for lost time. And I put too much on my plate. I was working probably, 60 hours a week. I was in an accelerated bachelor's program. And I felt like, all right, I don't need to go to those meetings as much anymore. And then before I know it, I'm going to 1 meeting a week. I'm way out of balance. I started cheating on my significant other, which for me is like a huge red flag that relapse is on the way. And with 3.5 years clean, I convinced myself I can just use a little bit of meth on the weekend. I have a success, I have a career, I have things in place. I'll just do a little on the weekend, and then I'll pick it up on Monday again. And I relapsed for 30 days and like burnt things to the ground. And that was kind of my pattern for a lot of years. Thankfully, I stayed in recovery. I stayed close to people in recovery. My longest relapse, I think, over the last decade plus was 2.5 months. And that first time I relapsed, I went to after the 30 days, beautiful New England Recovery Center. One of my 2 stays there, and a few more stays at Spectrum. And that's where my journey started again. This time I picked up with 2.5 years of continuous sobriety this time. And I was working as a case manager in detox, and then I was working for an agency as a recovery support navigator. And I had a lot of knowledge. I still do. But when I lose touch with the people in my life that love me enough to tell me when I'm going down the wrong path, when I stop going to meetings and lose touch with what happens when I pick up the first one, it becomes an option for me. And I did the same thing that I did that first relapse. I was in school, I was working, I was, out of whack. I was, changing my meds. I was, acting out on those behaviors. And it's a really quick progression for me these days, which I'm grateful for. But I also know that eventually it will kill me. Eventually something very bad will happen. I'll end up in jail for a long time. I'll end up, disfigured or sick or just dead. And I've seen it happen time and time again to people around me. So when I got to Spectrum this time, I was real shaky. I slept for the first week. And then when I came to, I was kind of like, all right, I'm just going to go back to my apartment. I'm going to go to meetings like I've gone to in the past. And I mentioned, people that love me enough to tell me the truth and tell me when I'm going down the wrong path. Everyone in my life, except one person who was active, were like, you need to go to further treatment. And I'm so glad that I listened to them because, it really gave me a foundation that I knew I needed deep down, but I thought that I'm good. I got this. I've done this before. I can figure it out. I have a good network, all that stuff. So I found myself at the Carl E. Dollhouse in Gardner, Massachusetts, which I had heard of when I was working as a case manager. I remember seeing the literature for it, and it seemed like a cool program. It seemed like, all right, like they're taking like a holistic and, whatever evidence-based approach to co-occurring like disorders. This looks great. I don't really, have much experience with animals. And it really gave me a foundation to kind of break down in a safe place, to kind of build myself up, to reconnect with some of the things that had worked for me in the past. And the animals there are really amazing. I connected with them on a deep level. It kind of gave me a new sense of spirituality and, new sense of how to care for myself by caring for others first. So where I'm at today, I work at a peer recovery center, which I love. I love the nonprofit world. It's been working for me. I'm able to run a few groups there. I'm able to sit in groups there, and I live in a sober house. It's this beautiful place behind me. And, it's one of those things that it's all about perspective, and a lot of things in my recovery are about perspective. It's like I could say, I'm 37 years old. I'm in another sober house. When am I going to get my life together? Or I could say, thank God I have a roof over my head, a safe bed to sleep in, roommates that I can connect with. And, just that I'm very grateful that I'm alive. So with that, I think I'm probably slightly over time, or maybe not, but close. So
All good.
Yeah, that's about all for my story for this morning. So thank you.
Well, I'm grateful for just a couple of things, Jim. One, my computer completely froze, and I joined on.
I was wondering what's going on.
But I didn't miss the second of your story.
Oh, cool.
Let me see if I can mute this. I can't even do anything on this.
So Alyssa's going through some technical difficulties there. Jim, I just wanted to thank you for your ability, your insight into everything that made you who you are today, the person in long-term recovery today that stands before us, really, where you should be, helping people. And I heard you say you have a lot of knowledge and still have a lot of knowledge. And I picked up on that because I think that's so true to those who are either watching this or going to listen to this later at some point. It's very easy to think that, returning to use, a relapse, it like resets the hard drive. And we know it doesn't, because your story is one, that tested out that, and it's, your story shows that staying close to people in recovery, that network, right, is important, is downright life-saving at times, right? Because I heard you say that, the relapses were getting shorter and shorter, and then, you always, went right back to treatment or to meetings or something like that. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you maybe came to know that, like, hey, wait a second, I don't have to start all over again. I start from my experience.
Yeah. So as you were saying that, thank you for your kind words as well. But this time around was really conscious, and somewhat my last time that I was starting the recovery process over, but not, like you said, I started being conscious of the fact that, like, if I was talking to a friend who had return to use, I would encourage them and I would say, all right, awesome, you got your 30-day trip again. And, it's not necessarily all about clean time and, you're here, you're alive, blah, blah, blah. But when I talk to myself, it's all right, well, you got 30 days, but you're never going to have the 3 years you had before. And that's just not accurate. It's not reality. And I think I was talking to someone at the recovery center about this recently in terms of that reframe and in terms of helping others in recovery and in terms of being helped by others in recovery. The way that I knew that I could come right back to meetings was because I watched other people come right back to meetings. So you never know, or I never know who in the room might be struggling with, being forthright about returning to use, or might not, want to talk about it at all. But I think for a long time, I can't think of the word, but for a long time, the rule of thumb in meetings was, abstinence equals recovery. And, if you relapse, you start back over at day one. And there's some merit to that because using is serious. But also, I think I'm personally grateful that the tide has kind of shifted away from that. And I knew that I would feel shame when I came back, but that no one was thinking I was a bad person or thinking I was a weak person. They were thinking, okay, like his sickness flared up and how can we help him? And how can, once I get a little better, how can I help myself and how can I help others? And I think that's, that's important because that shame and that guilt and that stigma will keep me out and will keep me sick. So I knew that there was always a safe place for me to come back to. For sure.
Jim, that's so important to have other people hear, because sometimes, like you said, the tide is shifting, but for a long time, in a lot of spaces, there's been this perception that, you're counting the days and you do start over. And really the reality of it is, in a chronic brain disease, it's a nonlinear pathway, right? No other disease pathway goes from you really have a hard time, you make a clean break, and then you have zero symptoms and you're perfect. Like none of that happens that doesn't happen in diabetes. That doesn't happen in asthma. Like I'm a horrible asthmatic, right? Like I don't take my controller medication, like all of that, so I have kind of, returns to symptoms, with my asthma. Like that's how chronic diseases work. And I think the more we can have people just stay connected to, I stayed connected to my prescriptions, to my providers, so that I don't end up in the hospital. That it's not really that much different, right? So you stayed connected to your recovery pathways, the things that that support you, and then just kept coming back to them. Right. And I think that's just such an important thing for folks to hear. And I guess one of the other things that I really want to reflect on, if you don't mind, is the fact that we are almost in Pride Month. And so I'm really grateful for your story, because I think some of the things that you said are really true. I don't think that we talk enough about the impact of substance use on the LGBTQ plus community. I don't think we talk about that pathway to crystal meth, that interaction throughout the community, all of those health challenges and really loss, that is just as significant, right? It's just that those medications don't cause kind of immediate overdose because they don't cause respiratory depression. But the way to hear you describe the impacts for yourself and others in your community with, psychotic episodes, psychiatric treatments, like that is really significant impacts on individuals, their families, their community, their loved ones. And I am really just personally grateful that we get to have this conversation, because I do think that Pride Month is not just a time to celebrate. I love to celebrate it, right? But it's also a time to really have conversations that might lead to some change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's something I feel strongly about, and it's something I feel grateful that I'm able to talk about comfortably. Like I said, for a long time, I was closeted until I was 19. And then it took me being in recovery to really come to terms with not my sexuality, but come to terms with being comfortable talking about my sexuality. My first sponsor I remember going to do my first step with him, and I was shaking. I was really scared, and I was like, just to let you know before we start, like, I'm gay, and I hope that's okay, and I hope that blah blah blah. And he was like, "You're a crystal meth addict. You've never talked about a woman in the 4 months that I've known you." He's like, "Obviously, you're gay," and it was, he knew that I was, but I still built it up to be this thing. So I credit my time in recovery to allowing me to even be comfortable enough to talk about it. But yeah, I think it. There's a large segment of men out there who experienced trauma during the AIDS epidemic, and I think experienced a lot of loss and didn't have adequate resources to deal with that. So I think many men from that era turned to drugs to cope with that. And then I think there's the societal stigma that still is heavy in that population. So as much as there's progress been made, as much as there's a lot more rights and protections for LGBTQIA2S plus people in the world today, there's still that idea that we're not equal or good enough, or that we're less than. So I think that definitely feeds into the substance use. And there's I don't remember the statistics offhand, but LGBT youth are statistically significantly more likely to attempt and complete suicide, more likely to develop substance use disorder, more likely to just be in at-risk situations, whether it's sex work, whether it's there's a whole list of reasons why it's important to highlight that. And I think something that I neglected, being young in the community, was that pull of crystal meth. And it's like, here, this is fun, you'll be able to party and, have sex, and that's the what you're supposed to do. And I saw recently something that said, there's a difference between being sexually liberated and being a sex addict. And I think that's kind of, a conversation that isn't had enough in the community, because it's uncomfortable and it's, can seem regressive at times to talk about that. But, I think that's really important to discuss. And when I first got clean or when I first entered recovery in 2012, my clinician at that rehab center was like, "Wow, you're the first client that I've ever had on crystal meth." And from a clinical perspective, looking back, I'm like, she definitely shouldn't have said that. Like, that didn't make me feel super confident. But also, as far back as that, it was, the wave's going to hit, the crystal meth wave is going to hit, the wave is going to hit. And it's already been here. I've people have been doing it, but no one really cared until it became common and it kind of hit the street. And the last like five years or so, it's like, it's common. And there's starting to be some more public health intervention around it, but again, it kind of it feeds into that feeling a little bit discarded as not that the opioid epidemic isn't probably more serious, because it will lead to immediate, like you said, respiratory depression and death. But I think there definitely needs to be more advocacy for the community in crystal meth.
And I think it's really important to look at the fact that when things are going through the LGBTQ plus community, there's an intersecting stigma there that I think we haven't come far enough to really look at. And so it makes sense from a brain disease perspective that substances would enter, right? They're prevalent in the community, and it takes you away from yourself, right? It takes you out. You described it really well. I think you said it kind of takes you out of your brain and out of your body, and you didn't have to have that struggle anymore. So it just makes sense to me, right, as a clinician, that that's what would be common and what would happen. But I don't think that the treating world is is ready for that, right? When you describe, the clinician saying, this is the first person I've had, and it's like, well, maybe we're not doing something great as a treatment community, right? Maybe we're not welcoming to those that need and affirming to those that need our support and our care enough. And there are some real logistical challenges, right? Like there's no detox protocol. There's less evidence-based care for that, but it doesn't mean there isn't care, right? CSS would be a reasonable, level of care, but people aren't walking in our doors at the CSS level of care. And I think as treating providers, at least for me, I always say, well, what could we do differently? Like what could we do to shift that?
I think that back in the 80s, 90s, from what I've heard, folks could actually go into detox for crack, right? And so the fact that, sorry, I'm trying to censor my words. I'm just going to speak for it. So the fact that insurance companies dictate so much of what treatment looks like nowadays is a shame. And it's too bad that the insurance companies don't listen to the providers, the frontline workers like yourselves, like myself, about what is needed. And I know for myself, if I was strung out on crystal meth and was told that I have to go to a CSS level of care, and I have to go to 8 groups a day, and I have to be active, and I have to eat all my meals, and I have to do that, I'm not going. What I'm doing is I'm going to drink and go to a detox because I know that I can sleep for a week, because that's what I need. Anyone coming off meth needs to sleep for a week. And, whether that's medically necessary or whether that, should be covered by insurance, I'm not able to say because I'm not a doctor or an insurance provider, but as someone who has come off crystal meth a lot of times, I know that that's what I need for a week. So even just that, offering a safe space for them to sleep where they're not in an ER hallway with beeping noises, making their paranoia and psychosis worse, where they're not having to start this recovery journey where, hey, it's really important that you be honest, but, lie to get into detox. It's definitely a gap in the, and that goes for cocaine, that goes for, I didn't even touch on the GHB that's prevalent in the community. I didn't, drugs that don't have, GHB does kind of have a detox protocol, not really, but, even though there's no detox protocol, doesn't mean there shouldn't be a safe space to crash for a week. And we've had, when I worked in a detox CSS, and we would have clients on meth that, in severe psychosis. And, this last time I was sent out a couple times because I was in severe psychosis and they didn't know what to do with me. They sent me to the ER to get cleared. And I got cleared because I kept my mouth shut at the ER, and then I came back and I was still psychotic. And on the one hand, I understand why those symptoms are alarming and need to be checked out. On the other hand, someone coming in off of more than a one-day meth binge is going to be psychotic probably. So how do you, it's education, it's compassion, it's, trauma-informed care, it's all of those things. But I think it's also, there's a lot of gaps in treatment, current treatment because of insurance.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think we're starting to get there a little bit as a field. We're starting to do more of that education. But if it doesn't trickle down to the community, it doesn't actually matter, right? If you're not going to show up at the front door and ask for what you need, and we aren't ready to give you what you need, then those things we need to change the whole system. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's still, if you have the right insurance, or if you are able to pay out of pocket, you can get better care. And, I think there's a lot of places working to fix that, but I think that's still the reality of it. So, I think equal access to everyone, regardless of financial status or, insurance status or socioeconomic backgrounds, race, gender identity, whatever is so important.
Most definitely. Thank you, Jen, for bringing that up. That's a great point. And yes, you're not a doctor or an insurance provider, but you have that experience, right? You know what works for you as somebody who has been there and so beautifully, eloquently can communicate, hey, this is what I needed. This is what worked for me. So I sort of wanted to switch gears a little bit to talk about what works today. I know what you do for work because I have the privilege of knowing you outside of this podcast. But for the people who are listening, for the people who just want to know more about what this peer recovery center is and your role there, I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work at Alyssa's Place Peer Recovery Center in Gardner. It's named after Alyssa Dunn, who passed away from an overdose in her early 20s. I'm not sure exactly how old she was. And it's been in Gardner for, I think, 7 or 8 years now. But her mother, Michelle Dunn, started the center in her honor, and it's an amazing resource for the community. I had gone there a few times, years ago, but when I was at the Carly Dollhouse, we would go to an all recovery meeting there a few times a week. And I was fortunate enough to be able to get a part-time job there as a recovery support assistant, which was very meaningful to me, and still is, because for them to have faith in someone who's in one of their programs to be able to, support others in their recovery without, a prescribed amount of clean time, without a prescribed amount of sober time, which used to be the norm, is super important. But what we do there, we have all different types of meetings that, in our philosophy, one of them is that, multiple pathways, non-denominational pathways are important and need to be made available. So personally, I've been facilitating an all recovery meeting once a week. I facilitate a DRA, Dual Recovery Anonymous meeting, and a couple of the members have expressed interest in an LGBT meeting. So we started that Tuesday nights at 6:00, which has been, haven't had a ton of attendance, but it's cool that we are able to offer it. But we have Dharma recovery, we have yoga, we have Codependent No More, we have AA meetings, we have an NA meeting, Wellbriety, which is a Native American approach, all kinds of stuff. So we offer those things, but then also we have an art group. We went to the Woo Sox game last week. There, we offer outings at no cost to the members, because for some people, sitting in a meeting for an hour isn't it. That's not the thing that's going to help them stay sober. For some people, taking a stroll around, Gardner when we do that, or going to a baseball game, or this Saturday we're taking a trip to the Phoenix gym in Boston. They have a Sober Pride dance. And the Phoenix is a great resource for people in recovery as well. And we offer a couple of Phoenix events through Alyssa's Place. So it's that we have a donation room for clothes for people getting back on their feet. We can connect you with resources. We have an on-site recovery coach. So that kind of model of being able to just stop in and tell us what you need. We'll meet you where you're at. We're not going to, kick you out if you're not following a certain protocol, or if your recovery, involves whatever your recovery involves. If it's MAT, if it's harm reduction, if it's complete abstinence, whatever that looks like, we meet you where you're at. So it's really the Worcester as Everyday Miracles. I know there's a bunch out there, but it's a cool model that I didn't know a lot about until I started working there. But now that I do, I think it's an amazing resource, and it's somewhere I feel fortunate to be a part of, for sure.
Yeah. Lisa, you're on mute there.
All right, now let me fix that. So real quick, I just want to shout out that Michelle Dunn is a friend of the podcast. We've had her on. So feel free, listeners, to go back and listen to that phenomenal story about how Alyssa's Place started. Really unbelievable. It's wonderful to hear how it's evolved. I'd love to just kind of say out loud again to listeners as we get into Pride Month that you do have an LGBTQ plus meeting on Tuesdays. So please go check that out if somebody needs that support. I think there needs to be more in-person supports. There's a lot virtually. But really, I really appreciate the multiple pathways conversation and the power of peer recovery support. It's such a wonderful support. We've had lots of peer recovery support centers on at Spectrum. We run, we're about to open our fifth in Southbridge this summer. So more to come on that. I'm sure we'll be doing something on the podcast to celebrate that as well. But everybody should go check out their local peer recovery support center, including Alyssa's place. So thanks so much for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously, those that have been listening for years know I'm partial to Spectrum. I've worked here. I think it's coming up on 7 years. I got sober here. Part of my recovery journey is Spectrum, but certainly Alyssa's place and Gamma, who runs Alyssa's place, and what Jim mentioned, the Carly Doll Farm, is near and dear to my heart as well. I've known Michelle, like I think everyone in the recovery community has out here for years, and just the work that they're doing there. And just again, to highlight the fact that, Jim was a resident in a program and worked in another program simultaneously, because going back to that previous statement, you don't lose the knowledge just because of a return to use. Now, I'm not saying that everybody that is the most appropriate choice for. However, it has been working for Jim for quite a while now. And I like to think the people that walk into Alyssa's place can relate to you more, because especially when you were so heavily involved. I mean, Gamma was like all around you, right?
Gammaverse.
So to engage with not only multiple pathways of care, but multiple levels of care simultaneously, I think is important. And also, I wanted to bring it back to the beginning as we're wrapping up here, something you said at the beginning that, really, despite the evidence, despite the doing well in school, and you were a good athlete and you had friends, you still felt different or felt less than, right? Well, I'm here to tell you today that you're not different and not less than. And the evidence is showing that, because here you are on the front lines helping people. You have a story that can help people. You're well regarded in the recovery community. And, again, I just wanted to thank you for sharing vulnerably and openly with anybody that's going to be listening to this. I think anybody that's either listening now or in the near future is going to be better for it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I have so much gratitude for this conversation, Jim. I didn't know you before we started this conversation, and now I feel like I do. I hope that we stay connected. I just really appreciate your ability to be vulnerable, to share your story. The work that you had to do to get to that place is really fantastic, and it makes a difference, right? And so I just have quite a bit of gratitude today for you and your journey, and you're sharing it with all of us.
Thank you. I'm still working on taking compliments, but I appreciate both your kind words very much. So thank you.
And I know you are, so that's why I wanted to end with that, because you deserve nice things said about you. So thank you again, Jim. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, James, for holding us down in the background with everything you do. For all those that are listening, like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. We will be back shortly for a Pride Month themed, even though I feel like this was the introduction to Pride Month. Totally not even on purpose, but hey, it was meant to be. So we will be back shortly with a Pride Month episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And until we talk again, take good care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye now.